It's happening one more time. This is so exciting. So this month, I am celebrating 8 years of hosting this podcast. 9 years ago, I started working on the show. I had a kid. Things got slowed down a little bit. But in 2016, I was able to publish my first episode. And here we are 8 years later, still doing this thing. So without any further delay, let me introduce you to this week's guest. Today's guest has dedicated her career to helping leaders discover their ideal roles and excel by leveraging their strengths. With a robust HR and executive search background, she's amassed over 2 decades of experience working internationally in the UK, Germany, Chile, and Singapore. Her journey began in HR and talent acquisition within the retail industry before transitioning into headhunting, HR leaders, and executive search. This diverse experience has equipped her with a deep understanding of organizational dynamics and leadership needs across different cultural contexts. As a LinkedIn top voice for careers, she's renowned for her expertise in career development strategies and her ability to empower individuals to clarify their career goals. She does this through individual coaching, group sessions, and engaging audiences through speaking engagements. She also loves mentoring and is the chief ambassador for the Girls Friendly Society, GFS, in England and Wales. Please join me in welcoming Ellie Rich-Poole. Welcome, Ellie.
Thank you, Robbie. It's a delight to be here with you today. Thank you for having me.
And thanks to technology, you're joining us all the way across the pond from London, UK. Thrilled to have you here. And as you know, the show is about building strong networks, but the context is leadership. So tell me, how do you define leadership, and when did you realize you had the skills to lead?
So when I was younger, I always thought of leadership as being a manager of someone. And I thought, oh, leadership means I get to be a team leader and I get to, manage other people. And I always aspired to do it. And I went into a management role when I was in the recruitment industry, and I realized it wasn't for me. It just didn't play to my strengths. And so actually my definition of leadership has evolved and changed over the years. And I see leadership now not about necessarily leading people, although I think that's part of it, more about being a role model for others. So my approach to leadership is helping other people. It's helping to develop other people, and it's about encouraging them. It's also for me a bit about being an expert in your field, and championing change. It's also around speaking up and being brave. I strongly believe that leaders are people who can make a difference in the world. And so that's what I try to do in my part of that. And actually, I've realized it's not about being a line manager, although for some, those two things coincide. But I think I realized that definition of leadership since I've been running my own business, which I started in 2016. And I realized you don't have to be a line manager to be a leader and to make a real difference in your field.
Congratulations to 8 years.
Thank you. Yes. So it's your 8 years birthday for the podcast. And this very week, I've just completed my 8 years in business. And this week is the start of year 9. So we should have like a joint cake or something.
Yes, seriously. Where's that cake? Oh, production. They forgot the cake. All right.
Yeah, no one brought it.
So I love this. You're distinguishing between being a leader based on the title you were bestowed, or a leader who really recognizes the talents in others, nurtures them, is a champion for change, is sort of paying attention. And it's interesting you say that, because I think a lot of times when we're first learning about leadership, that sort of bold leader type with the title is what we know. But I also appreciate that you found yourself in a role like that and was like, this isn't really for me. Because so many people get moved from sort of, direct service roles to manager, supervisor roles without real training. And they're in over their head because people management is not the same as whatever their job was, whatever their expertise had been. But I want to actually roll the clock back a little bit, Ellie. I want to go back to your childhood. Like, I want to know who Ellie was on the playground in primary school. I want to know, did you organize your friends to play games? Did you sit back and watch everything? Were you the kid who always got called on by the teacher because they knew you would be helpful? Like,
Oh,
what kind
wow.
of kid were you? Did you run for a student office or get involved in after school activities and clubs? Like, who was Ellie, way
Who
back?
was Ellie? Oh, yes. So Ellie has always been a joiner. From a very young age, I enjoyed connecting with other people. And it's funny, I think I was about 8 years old when I got my first international pen pal. There was this scheme at school where it was like, hey, would you like to have a pen friend? And you filled in this little form. And I got a pen friend in America, a girl called Shanna, who I am still in touch with today. Enjoyed building relationships. Interestingly, when I was really little, so around that same time in primary school, I was less confident in person with people, people in the playground, as an example. And I had a small group of friends, but I would never describe myself as being sort of hugely popular. I was probably I've always been very clumsy, slightly geeky, and quite swotty. I used to enjoy, for fun of an evening, I used to enjoy doing my maths workbook, and I was quite competitive with this other kid in my class because I always wanted to be ahead in the maths, which is quite funny. And and I think as I got older and I went into senior school, I think my confidence developed. My confidence grew, and I was probably better in person, and built some brilliant friendships, people that I'm still in touch with today. And actually, just recently, I arranged our school reunion for our 30-year celebration, and got together about 40 women who had been girls together during the sort of 80s and 90s, which was amazing. If I think about myself at senior school, when I was a bit more developed, I would say arty, loved artwork, quite musical at that time. I don't do much with that now, but I was sort of always seen carrying my clarinet around. Again, not cool, I wasn't sort of in it, playing electric guitar or something. I was kind of playing my clarinet, but always, quite studious, enjoyed learning.
I'm just picturing you being super competitive around that.
Well, later I'm jumping ahead now, but when I went into the world of recruitment, that competitive streak really came out as well. I have got a competitive streak, and it's interesting because so many people I work with as a coach are quite, if they do have that, they don't like it. It's seen as quite a negative connotation. And I confess I've always had it, right since school, but I've got to the stage where there's certain, games I don't play at family get-togethers because it's just dangerous.
Disastrous opportunity there.
Step away from the games, Ellie.
To know that about yourself can be really helpful too, because it can get you going and make you push yourself harder and do more and excel. But yes, there are limits to that being fun. So I'm glad that you're this is maturity, is understanding that difference.
Well, and in a work world, it's that balance, isn't it, of balancing the drive. So I'm competitive in some settings with others, but I'm also extremely self-driven. So, I work alone a lot of the time, and I'm still sort of always striving to do more and to make more of a difference and all that kind of stuff. But you have to keep that in check, because the risk of that overplayed drive is that you can also sort of wipe yourself out and fall over eventually if you don't know when to stop. So good learnings.
Yeah. So when you were, I don't know, 12 or so years old, did you have a sense of what you wanted to be when you grew up? Was there a path laid out by your family? Was university a given? Was there a family business to go into? Was there a passion that you had? Like, what was the sort of future you that you thought you would be?
So I didn't know what I wanted to do in the future. In fact, at school, the advice we always got given was to pick the subjects you're best at and that you enjoy, and keep studying them. So there was never a kind of career path that has brought me to what I do now. My family weren't in the corporate world at all. They were both architects, my mum and dad. So that kind of slight artistic streak, definitely, and the maths, actually, the art and the maths, you can see where that took them. But I sort of, on reflection, that wasn't a route that particularly appealed to me. There definitely was an expectation at my school that most people went on to some sort of higher education, typically university, and both my parents had, and they'd met at university. So that was talked about, not in terms of pressure, but it was sort of almost talked about as a life stage. It's that kind of, getting to move away and go and get your freedom and, go away and study, but go and become independent and have fun. So I sort of always just assumed that's what I'd do, but didn't know. In those days, career advice, as I said, was about pick the subject. And so I picked my best subject, which was geography, and went off and studied that at Durham University, which was interesting, but it hasn't really sort of led to my career, which was then into sort of retail consultancy and now working as a career coach. So it's, it's not a direct correlation for
I
sure.
think you're the first person, Ellie, that I've met who like majored in geography and hasn't gone on, to do something like an archaeology type thing.
To do something with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like it's an interesting topic, but it's not one that is applicable to like the workforce. But I'm sure there are transferable skills, like anything. You're learning how to study, learning how to memorize things, learning how to discuss. I mean, I feel like there's a lot you can draw from that. But it wasn't like you had a clearly laid out plan. So when university ended, how did you figure out what steps to take as you entered the workforce? Was there like you ended up kind of more in the corporate space. You didn't have that in your family. So like, how was that even kind of part of the, I don't know, you're like the zeitgeist that you were living in? It was like, oh, we should go and do this next.
Yeah, it was. So one day in a geography lecture, one of the professors, he handed out a list of employers, and he said, this is where any previous Durham geography graduate has gone on to work at. Here's a list of all the employers. And it was typically graduate schemes. So actually at that time, there were many blue chip companies had graduate schemes that took you in regardless of your career. So it was just regardless, of your degree. So I'd done geography, but it was like you could have done geography or history or French or whatever, but you could go and apply to Shell on their graduate scheme or whatever it was. So I got the list, went down it, and I just circled any of the ones that I thought sounded interesting. And then I realized that all the ones I'd circled were retailers, and which found myself in retail. It's really interesting. Looking back now, at that time, I think it's because they were recognizable brands and they were things that appealed to me. And I was like, ooh, Marks and Spencer's, all these sort of, good UK retail brands. I didn't know, companies now that a lot of people go on great graduate schemes. So like the big four consultancies or kind of, like big, more blue chip, but non-customer facing. So maybe more like your B2B blue chips. I hadn't heard of them because they weren't consumer brands. So I never went off and researched them and thought, oh, well, I don't know what these other ones are. I should go and read about, ICI or wherever. I just went, no, I'll go. And I literally went, there was the Christmas holidays at that, it's sort of Christmas holidays in my first year at uni. Literally went and wrote a load of application forms, and it was writing in those days, Robbie. It was like literally, and I remember the graduate scheme that I joined, which was the Kingfisher graduate scheme, which at that time had brands like B&Q, Woolworths, but also some European brands as well. I wrote it by hand on Christmas Day afternoon. Because I got bored at home at Christmas and I was missing university. I was like, oh, I'm going to my room, and I went and wrote an application form, and that was the Kingfisher one, and that was the scheme I ended up joining.
There's so many throwbacks to this. I'm turning 50 this year, so you and I are of the same generation.
We are of the same generation.
And like you said, there was the internet, but it was very fledgling, early 90s. There was email, but not everyone had it. Not everyone had a computer. So you really relied on fax was like the fastest way to communicate, and it was brilliant, but you really didn't have easy instant access the way we have today to like information. So at first I'm like, this is amazing that this professor gives you this list of where other graduates had gone who had this degree, because it helps you kind of frame your options. But of course, you're going to look at that list, and the names that are going to pop out are going to be the ones that you recognize. And any of the consultancy, like you said, the B2B, the top four, they're not going to be ones you know about. And it wasn't like you could just hop on your phone and just beep, beep, beep. Oh, that's interesting, or look at what they say about them on Glassdoor. I mean, we have so much information now, which is why I find it really interesting to talk to a career specialist about how you got started because
I
it
know.
was
Yeah.
just such a different period of time. And you didn't, I mean, did you even know the kind of work you were going to end up doing in these places? It was just like,
No.
well, I recognize these brands.
No, so they had general management graduate schemes. So what they did, so the one I joined, the Kingfisher graduate scheme, they rotated you every 6 months. You got to move to a different department, and during that time, you had a real job to hold. So you were doing a proper job for a period of 6 months. At the same time, we went off and studied management at Oxford University, which was great thing to do, and we kind of we got exposed to different parts of the business. So I did 6 months in retail operations out in stores in the real world, which was great. And then moved to head office and I did buying, I did finance, and I did human resources. But in those days, they called it personnel. And I was looking after the recruitment for the B&Q graduate scheme at that stage, which I loved. And you kind of get these tasters. And at the end of the 2-year scheme, you get your postgraduate diploma, you kind of get signed off for having done these different areas, and then you go and apply for a proper, i.e. a full-time job. But you had to, it wasn't a given. You had to go and find an actual vacancy and apply for it. And by then, having experienced those different areas, I was getting clearer on what my passions were and where my strengths lay. And I knew already I loved recruitment. I loved standing up in front of people doing, I was hosting assessment centres, or I was doing fairly low level. I was very young, but kind of induction training, things like that. And I knew that I enjoyed that kind of people facing. I enjoyed the time in stores. I enjoyed being there to the customer. I enjoyed the kind of down to earth nature of that. Flip side, I was dreadful in finance. Let's just say it didn't play to my strengths, and was a fairly unhappy period for me, and not Ellie at her best when I was in that department.
Opportunity, though. I mean, so I lived in Boston, Massachusetts, in the U.S. for about 20 years, and Northeastern University is based in that area, and they have a program where students can take up to 3 6-month internships, whatever you might call that. And they don't all take all 3. Like, not every student does all 3, but I think everyone does at least one. It's very culturally built in to, why would you go there if you weren't going to do this, basically? But the students that I met through that program, because I was one of the employers that we would get these interns, they really just had such a better sense of what they wanted to do when they grew up, or at least like their skills that they could apply, or like, for instance, getting an opportunity to stand in front of a group and do a small training, pick up the phone, call people, walk into a store and ask for an auction donation, like different things that, again, not everyone was good at all things, but it's such an opportunity. I didn't go to a school that had that. And so you don't graduate with real world experience. And there's that whole like chicken and egg. How do you get a job if you've never had experience? You need experience to get a job, but you don't have a job, so you don't have experience. Like, and this really sidesteps all of that and lets you sort of experience some of that. I also think 6 months is just long enough to figure out where the bathrooms are. So you really spend a lot of time being like, I don't know what I'm doing. But if you like the work, it's a more enjoyable 6 months. But like you said, if it's not a good fit for your strengths, it's pretty clear. And at least you can spend 4 years of school to get that, access to that job. You learned it in a few months that, I don't need this.
And if you're not good at it, it's not too long to have to just keep
Right.
doing. I tell you what, the 6 months felt a lot longer in some of those placements than it felt in other ones.
It's just such a great, I love that you had that opportunity, because
great.
To a recruiter, like how does anyone even know that that's a thing? I think when we're younger and we're looking in at what a company is, we know very few titles. We have a very like limited understanding of what those roles could be. When you're in a company for like a year, you start to recognize the wide array. Particularly larger companies have even more of that. But it's really hard to imagine yourself in a space until you're there, which is why doing those kind of when you're calling people and you're like, can I just talk to you a little bit about your job? How did you end up in this role? Like all those kinds of conversations are so important, but nothing really replaces getting a chance to be there. So that's really cool. And I think anyone who's listening, who's considering, a career change, finding a way to volunteer even in some capacity, just to be a little more in the know about what's going on in these spaces might be helpful. But informational interviews obviously is a second sort of option. How long did you end up staying in this recruitment space in retail? And did you stay the same brand, or did you keep kind of moving about for a little bit?
So I stayed for a little while longer in what was then the Kingfisher Group. So I went from B&Q head office into a new concept, which sadly is no longer with us, but it was a new concept called Big W, which was out of town retail stores comprising all of the different Kingfisher brands. So it had general merchandise, it had health and beauty, it had clothing, it had, it was a bit like in the US, the Walmart type of concept.
That's what I was imagining.
Which was new in the UK. That wasn't really a thing in England. And actually our MD had come over from the US and was bringing this big out of town concept to the UK. And I held that role. I did the HR team leader role for that for a while, did a store opening, which was a brilliant experience. And then I remained in retail, but moved to Germany and did some work with NAFI, which is the retailer for the armed forces, which again, very different world, retail, but very different world. And sort of did that. And it was when, I think it was 2005, when I moved from retail in sort of retail HR and recruitment roles, when I made the step into recruitment consultancy, and I became a fee earning consultant, hiring HR people in the UK. And that was real, like that. I guess that was the end of sort of the first chunk of my career and the beginning of the start of the second chunk.
What led to that leap?
I went along to see some recruitment consultants because I was looking for my next job. So I was in Germany and my contract was coming to an end and I knew I wanted to get back to England. And so I went and met different recruiters that hired for HR positions and had lots of nice interviews with all these consultants. And somewhere along the way, one of them said to me, well, given your experience, have you ever considered being a recruitment consultant? And I was like, I sort of thought about it, but not in great detail. But I've always enjoyed my conversations with the recruiters. But my old boss said to me, he said, no, Ellie, don't do it. You'll hate it. It's basically sales. And he was quite strong in his, his sort of urging me not to do it. That arguably was the worst thing to say to me because of my competitive streak. And so not as overtly as that, but I think now looking back, I'm a little bit like, if someone tells me I shouldn't do something, there's part of me that wants to explore it more. So I explored the opportunity alongside other HR and recruitment roles in-house. And I actually got 2 job offers at the same time. I got a job offer to go to a retail company as their HR manager. And I got a job offer to join Michael Page, which is, now a big global recruitment consultancy. Got the opportunity to join them in their human resources recruitment bit. And I went for the recruitment consultancy job for 2 reasons. One was because I could work Monday to Friday and I'd get my weekends off. Whereas the retail one, you had to be on a rota to work weekends. And secondly, a bit more of a serious reason, actually. It was around that time that there were the terrorist attacks in London and the UK. It was the month after the buses got blown up in London. And the offer I got was for a flagship 7-story retail outlet in Birmingham. And I thought to myself, this sounds a bit depressing, sorry, but I thought to myself, if I was a terrorist and I wanted to cause major, maximum damage in the UK's second largest city of Birmingham, I would go to a department store on a Saturday, and I just thought part of the role was to be a key holder. You were one of the responsible people for the store. And if it had been my day in charge of the store on a Saturday and there was something that happened, I just thought I think I'm actually too scared to take that risk, which is always bad to confess, isn't it? But I was like, do you know what? I don't know whether I want to put myself in that situation. And that would be almost, imagine 7 stories worth of people in a building you have to evacuate at a time of sort of, it was a very high threat time. And I chickened out, and I went for the maybe like, was it safer? I think it was risks for a different reason of risks. So I went for the recruitment consultancy reason, got to work Monday to Friday, and got to try something completely different.
It was a different kind of risk, and it was a less known risk. I feel like the visceral risk of the terrorist possibility was so real for you that you couldn't take that image out of your head. Once it was planted, once you thought it, I think it was hard for you to let go. You would have spent every Saturday thinking, this is the day.
What if?
Yeah. I mean, the way you just described it made me kind of chill, because that's a lot of responsibility for anybody, and to take that on and have to get everyone out safely amidst all that chaos and terror.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you end up in a role where you don't really know what you're doing.
And that is true. That is true, Romy. I was Ellie, like, okay, throw me in there.
It's very entrepreneurial of you. Back, pre having your own business, this is still a very entrepreneurial spirit, because if you had taken the retail role, you had so much experience leading up to that. You had slowly built your way into that experience. Like, it wasn't like you just got thrown in, whereas this was new, and it did involve not necessarily like sales, but a lot of, the same kind of activities as a salesperson, which is not something you had been really responsible for. There wasn't like a fill the quota kind of mentality before when you're handling HR experiences. So the unknown felt safer to you. It was very interesting, given like the real risk, the physical risk, the mental risk of being in a retail at that time. I mean, thank you for sharing that, because that's how we sometimes make decisions. It's a gut kind of reaction, and we can't turn that off. You ended up liking it. So how long did you stay in the world of the HR consultancy and recruiter consultancy, I should say?
Yeah, so I did thankfully end up liking it, and it turns out I'm good at sales, if we're calling it sales. So I stayed in that world until 2016. So a good period of time, 11 years was the second chunk of my career, with 3 different recruitment firms, getting progressively more senior in terms of the roles I was hiring. So initially it was hiring sort of HR advisors, HR managers, and then up to sort of heads of HR. And then latterly I was doing, chief people officer and, HR leadership searches, and really enjoyed it. It absolutely did play to my strengths, and it suited me at that stage of my life, because it was very much a kind of work hard, play hard type of lifestyle. It was long hours. You had to be there for your clients whenever they needed you, and sometimes that was around the side of their working day. And when I started in this world, it was pre where we are now in terms of the technology and the connectiveness that we can have, where you can just be on your smartphone all the time. At this stage, people would stay late in the evening in the office, so they could use the landline to call people. So it was quite old school now, looking back. But yeah, really enjoyed it. Different skill set. But what I did do is I took a lot of my retail spirit to my recruitment, and I think in some ways I was a little bit out of the ordinary. And so, for example, our success criteria, it was very much around, your revenue billing, how much have you billed this month? But there were also some sort of more, I suppose, softer measures, if you will. We had some other KPIs. And actually, one of these things was when anyone's file got closed down as a candidate, because you'd placed them or they'd been placed by someone else on the market, but they were no longer an active candidate, they used to receive this survey about the service that they'd experienced from their Michael Page consultant. And one of the questions in that was, do you feel like your consultant kept in touch with you well? And I remember really early on clocking this, and I took that language of keeping in touch, and I used to send out emails to all my contacts, all the people that I was in charge of looking after in terms of my candidates. And I used to call the email keeping in touch. And so when they got this survey that was like, do you feel like your consultant has kept in touch with you? I was like, This is me emailing to keep in touch with you. I used to send them these messages every month. And of course, I was also speaking with them and meeting them and all that kind of stuff. But I remember this spirit of retail being, what were your key performance indicators? How do you make sure the customer gets what they need? And so I was determined that all of my customers, my candidates, when they got this email, they would all say, yes, Ellie has kept in touch with me well. And I remember this one person that said I hadn't kept in touch. And I was so upset, Robbie. I got pulled into the office by my manager because this guy had complained. I was so upset. I cried because I was like, but I work so hard at keeping in touch with everybody. And literally, it was one person, and he's the one I remember, but felt that he hadn't had enough contact. But there we go.
Oh my gosh, that last piece about the one survey that comes back not 100% fives across the board or whatever the number is supposed to be. I was just talking about this in a group full of speakers. 80 people in a room, 30 fill out the survey, 1 or 2 say something not as complimentary, and like we fixate on that.
We go to that, don't we? Of course we do. It's human nature. And my coaching clients are the same. I do an exercise with my coachees where they seek feedback from 5 people in their network. It's this exercise where they go out with a few questions. And honestly, they all do it. They go straight. 4 out of the 5 questions are really positive. And one of them is, what could I do differently for my own benefit? So it's a kind of weaknesses one, but it's still positively framed. Everyone goes to that question first.
Yeah.
Like, oh, but I could do these things differently.
But that I love that piece about how you translated what you were going to be graded on, like what was the KPI that you're going to be measured on, and then figured out, okay, I want to make sure that I'm meeting that, so I'm going to be explicit. So I don't know why this sprang to mind, but I worked in lots of restaurants on my way up. And I had worked at a restaurant here in the States, which is called Bertucci's. It's an Italian restaurant. And there was a chart on the wall where the servers hung out that on there was how many bottles of wine sold. That seemed to be a metric that they cared about. And I asked about it. And then I found out that a half carafe of wine counted as a bottle.
Amazing.
I would walk up to a table and ask them if they'd like some wine. And as they were debating, and I'd say, if you'd like, you could each get a half carafe. It's about 2.5 glasses, but it's perfect for a meal like this. And I was selling
you could try 2 wines.
Yeah, I was selling 2 half carafes to tables of 2 over and over
and over
again.
It. And then you doubled your numbers.
Yeah, some people sold like 2 or 3 bottles a week. I was selling 18, 24.
I love it. But that's the thing, right? Isn't it? Part of my HR studying was in kind of compensation and benefits and kind of that reward space. And I remember some of this is just about understanding what you're being measured on to be a high performer. It's a no-brainer, is it? It's like, look at leaders, they're doing it all the time with their bonuses. It's like whatever you bonus a leader on is that's the thing they will focus on in the business, which is why it's so important to get your reward structures right. But yeah, if you're kind of clever, you just get wise to it and make sure you're successful in whatever measures they're looking at.
So in 2016, you decided time for Act 3.
Yeah.
I know I already said, to me, you're very entrepreneurial. You've got that spirit of willingness to try things out, but it's still really different to be running your own company because suddenly you're in charge of everything. And I've met a lot of people who were so, I don't know if shock's the right word, but like thrown off that they're doing the sales, the marketing, the technology. I work with a lot of entrepreneurial women in their 50s and beyond who are looking to grow their impact and income through some kind of new revenue stream. And the reason they want to do it is that they're brilliant. They have all this expertise over 20 or 30 years. They're ready to give back. They want to have a huge impact. And they're 58 and they've never had to fill a pipeline. They've always had someone else in the company doing that. They've just served clients, which is just a very different mindset. So what was challenging for you when you made this decision to shift from sort of being within a company doing this work to you being the company?
Yeah, so thankfully, due to the nature of my recruitment work, I didn't have a problem with the pipeline, because ever since I started that, I've always done my own business development. So I've always brought in my own business. So I really enjoy the kind of relationship building piece. I'm quite happy to, get out there and sell. Again, back to that phrase, it's not selling. I work with HR leaders. It's much more around being there to provide the right service for them. But I'm quite comfortable to get out there and keep in touch and actually love connecting, which is how we first came into contact, talking about the whole networking thing. But there were bits. Oh, so Robbie, I am not amazing on the technology. The first thing, it was like literally day one, I was like, ooh, well, I don't think Hotmail's going to cut it, is it? I'm like, so suddenly thinking, right, oh gosh, I need to think about my tech. So I need to get a professional email address. I need to, and I wasn't ready to have a website day one. I've never been someone that kind of goes into it, making it all kind of fully formed. I was much more like, I immediately had 2 clients that wanted to work with me. So I just got into the work and used LinkedIn. But, I did need to get a professional IT, supplier. I needed to, it was very practical things that for me. Also, I don't like spending time doing sort of too much admin work. So as soon as I could afford to, I outsourced certain parts of my business. And that's one of my biggest tips to people if they decide to set up on their own, is almost find the bits you love and are great at and energize you, like your energizing strengths, and do those bits yourself. So for me, that includes the coaching work itself or the delivery work, but also the relationship building. I love social media. I love, writing, so I can do my blogs and content. That's all cool. I've got a wonderful executive assistant that supports me. Shout out to Millie Hall of Sidekick. She's amazing. She does all of my diary management and helps me on all sorts of things. When you have to fill in those forms for companies because you want to become a supplier, literally my heart drops when I get one of those. It's just like, oh. So she helps me with all of those things. And I've got some other people I go to for different things, kind of accountancy support. I've got another shout out, Sam Wiltshire Social. She supports me. Whilst I write all of my social content, she does a lot of support for me with things like scheduling and visuals, all the kind of, beautiful creations in terms of sort of, images and quotes and all that sort of stuff. So I use people to help me using their skill sets and their strengths where I'm not best placed. And of course, we've only got 168 hours a week, all of us. So I don't want to spend my hours doing certain work. I want to spend it doing other things. So so I sort of now, 8 years in, I've drawn in a great support team of different people for different things. I work on the work that I want to do. And I've also evolved my business offering. So when I started, I was doing consulting work and a range of talent projects. And over the years, I've kind of dialed that right down, and I'm now not doing consulting, and I've kind of dialed up the coaching, the development, the speaking sessions and so forth. So I think it's a bit about letting things evolve and enjoying that journey, and knowing that, you don't have to decide on day one the shape of your finished business. It's going to, it's all going to evolve, and things get better as you go along. So, about maybe 2 or 3 years ago now, 3 years probably, I set up my monthly email letter, thanks to Dorrie Clark, our mutual friend Dorrie. I sort of, I studied her Recognised Expert program and got some brilliant business development and growth tips from her, and things that you start to put in place over time. So I think it's like, it has to be that journey of little changes, little improvements every single year.
So much gold. I want to pull out a few things. One is, you didn't immediately focus on building a website. And I want to call that out, because a lot of us feel like we have to have the website. We have to have the website. And it's a noble obstacle, which is a term from the book Finish by John Acuff. The book is called Finish, Getting to Done. And it's the first time I heard this idea of a noble obstacle. We all know about shiny objects, things that like draw our attention because someone else is doing it. So, oh, we should be doing that too. But a noble obstacle is a little harder to see within ourselves. And even our close friends may not call it out, because it seems sort of logical that a business should have a website. But as you said, you didn't need a website to get those first few clients. It was based on your reputation, your experience, your network. And you also didn't have 100% understanding of what the business was going to be. So you could have spent a whole year or longer trying to perfect a website. Instead, you went and started building your client list. And over time, I think as we start to reach out beyond our initial core network, that's where the website becomes more important, because it's a way for decision makers that we're being introduced to. They glance, they see we have the reputation, we seem legit, and then they're good. But initially, those people who are saying yes, they're not they're not looking to see if we have a website. They like us and they want to work with us. I have launched so many offers in the last, I don't know, 5 years, where the website part came much later after the offer was solidified. And I remember the beginning part, that was where I was really felt like I had to have everything perfect. And it's a tendency. So I also wanted to call out the idea that as soon as you could, you started figuring out how to bring other people in to handle the tasks that were not your sweet spot. And Dory Clark, my friends have joked that I could just make a drinking game out of how often I say her name in business context, because she is amazing. But she's been a friend and mentor and sometimes coach of mine for a very long time. And she gave me some advice about this. Before I could really afford a virtual assistant, I was getting ready to write a book and publish my book, and I knew I needed some help. And she said that was something that she had missed the timing on, that she didn't have admin support set up before needing it. And there was a period of time where there was a lot going on. And so I actually hired someone for zero pay for 3 months in exchange for me training them on how to run a book launch and training them on all the tech pieces of how to help me manage my podcast, so that they would then have those skills for other clients. At the end of the 3 months, I started paying them. And that's how I finally made my way in. I just created this experience for someone else to come in. So, you talk about earlier, we were talking about internships. I essentially created an apprenticeship internship experience, because I had to do it all myself up to that point. So I knew how to do it, but I needed to actually share that knowledge with someone else whose job it would be, so I wasn't in charge of it anymore.
Well, then it allows you then to step away, because actually another thing you've probably found the same is that when you start in your business and it's just you, it makes it hard to step away. If you want to take a vacation or you want to do something else, it makes it a lot harder, and you have to always be at least available to some extent to kind of be picking up messages. As soon as you can have other people trained up in aspects of it, it means you can then step away. And actually, that's something I found hard when I was in the fee earning recruitment world, because people want you all the time. But actually now I can do, because not only, the work is slightly different, but also I've got these people that I can say, on my out of office, I'm away delivering for a couple of days and I'm not going to be on my emails, but here's somebody who can help you, and here's some, point you off in the direction of different people. Because without that, when you're on your own, it is quite hard to give the great service you want to when you're not physically there all of the time.
Yeah, excellent. As we're wrapping up here, I have to make sure to ask you the questions about specifically networking, because clearly you have done a great job, like staying in touch. And a big part of recruitment is understanding how to build relationships. People leave their roles over time, right? Particularly in certain industries, that happens even greater frequency. So staying in touch means that you'll continuously be available to them when they need you. So how do you think about nurturing? I mean, we have sort of the inner circle of the people you're going to stay in touch with. But then I always wonder about the second and third layers or tiers out, the people that you see once a year at a conference, worked with 5 years ago, but haven't had a reason to since. You like each other. That's the baseline. You like it. You enjoy each other. So how do you think about nurturing those kinds of more distant or weaker connections? Any habits, philosophies, practices?
Yeah, no, thank you. And you're right, because we have that like inner circle, and that's almost the easy bit, isn't it? Because of course we're going to keep in touch. So I think it's important to tailor your approach to keeping in touch based on, how obviously the sort of closeness of the contact, but also based on my own strengths and what I enjoy doing. So what I do in terms of my networking is I go back to the things I love doing and look at how I can make that into a networking opportunity. So, for example, I absolutely love connecting people. I'm good at organizing, and I enjoy being in the spotlight. And so one of my best ways of networking is hosting events. So I recently launched we did a pilot in April. We're going to be doing more an initiative called the Wonderful Women Movement, which is to support a charity. You mentioned them earlier, Girls Friendly Society. So it's another win-win. But really what we do is we get 50 women in a room together. We have some inspirational speakers. We do a professional matchmaking service. So we connect people to other people so they can get to know new people. And we sort of just have a very fun time. And I don't even call it a networking event, because people, as we know, the name can have some negative connotations. So I call it a development event. But really it's about getting lots of people together. And things like that are amazing, because you can reconnect with lots of people at the same time in a positive setting. I'm all about having a growth mindset, bringing people together and focusing on the positive, hence kind of the inspiring speakers and kind of helping people just have a really, really enjoyable, positive evening. And I do things like that as a way to get at quite a few people at one time. But it's great. It's just great professional development for all of us, because we have these brilliant people on the stage and we sort of leave inspired. So I do that. I also do some of the more I guess sort of regular activities. I enjoy writing, another one of my energizing strengths. So I do my monthly email message, which I call Positivity Bites, and that goes out to people on my contact list. So that's a good way that I can just, it's less interactive, unfortunately, and I always want people to write back to me, and not many people do. So that doesn't feel like a very two-way method, but I keep doing it because I think it's important to know that I'm still there. And I always invite them to message me, and I hope in time they will do that more. Also LinkedIn, you mentioned at the start, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn, and I post without fail every Wednesday morning, 6:30 UK time. And one of the ways I keep in touch with people is I reply to every single comment, and I get a lot of direct messages from my posts. I reply to all of those. And quite often that will prompt a kind of coffee meeting. So it'll be kind of, it was really nice to trade messages. Let's do a virtual coffee, or let's meet up. So I'll kind of do that. I love handwriting as well. Again, maybe my age, but I also do at Christmas, I send out many cards, and at International Women's Day, I send out many cards to kind of, I guess, absolutely my inner circle, but the sort of the next one out from there as well. So for me, it's about do things that I'll enjoy to keep in touch with people that I want to. And I will say as well, I do bravely step away if I find that people, because we meet so many people, don't we? When I do meet people that I feel that aren't aligned to me in terms of my values, I will sort of, not rudely, but just gently sort of step away. So I do very much focus on people I think that share a similar ethos and share that kind of growth mindset and positivity as well.
I love the concreteness of what you just shared. So many people, I get to this point in the conversation and they go, I don't know what I do. I mean,
I do more, but we've not got much time, have we, Robbie? I'm conscious. I'm talking too much, so I'm going to stop.
I love it. No, this is really, really helpful, concrete ideas. I see myself in your statement about bringing people together, hosting things. I mean, virtual has now become my favorite format for that, and I'm constantly hosting gatherings virtually, weekly, monthly. I volunteer to host them for other groups as networking events, because like being the host, again, like I have the ability to do this. Let me bring people together. If it's in person, I'm organizing dinners. I was just in New York City for about it was really like a full 2 days, one morning to the next night, and so 36 hours. I saw like 20 people.
I'm going to be in New York in September, and I'm thinking I'm going to do the same. I'm going to just try and go somewhere and say who's in New York at the same time, and try and meet up with people.
Lunches, breakfasts, meals, walks. It's great.
Amazing.
We're about to get to my favorite wrap-up question, but first we're going to pause for a moment for a word from our sponsor. My favorite wrap-up question. All right, so here's like we're now celebrating 8 years of you and getting your business going. So let's say it's a year later And we are still connected through the Dory Clark Recognized Expert community, which is wonderful. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Ellie, it's been a year since we had this conversation. I'm going to then ask you, what have you been up to? I'm going to know what you'll be celebrating a year from now. What are you most looking forward to in the year ahead?
I love that question. It's like I can just tell you the things on my vision board, right? Because I'm going to achieve them. So a year from now, I am going to have the draft of my book written, which I've started. I'm writing a book about working out what's important in your career and then giving loads of practical tools to make it happen. It's well underway, but I will, in a year, I'll have got my first draft, and hopefully I'll have gone a bit further than that and got feedback and found someone to represent me and all that good stuff. So that's the book stuff. I will have grown a bigger team of ambassadors for GFS, the charity I work with, and I will have hosted some more fantastic, wonderful women events. And what I'm keen to do is to get speakers in for that from different walks of life. And I hope that I have this vision. You've got to dream big, right? I have a vision that maybe it could be in some way a little bit like the vibe of a TED talk, but people actually aspire to come along and speak at one of these events. And we've set up our YouTube channel. And, I'd love to have got a year from now to have got maybe 3 or 4 more of those events under my belt and had, so perhaps like 16 keynote speakers that have come along. My day job business will be ticking along nicely, and I'll be working with some awesome, career coaching clients. And I'll also have done some more speaking engagements to some bigger audiences internationally. So I've got my first New York booking for September, which is really exciting. I hope to get a trip back to Singapore early next year. So if anybody's listening and they'd like to book me from somewhere exciting around the world, please do get in touch.
I love all of this. I cannot wait to celebrate this happening and, of course, support you along the way. I'm particularly excited about your progress with your book, because book launching has become a big focus of my business of late, helping entrepreneurs build profitable launches leading to 50 plus reviews and building that pipeline to the offer that comes after the book. So I love helping people leverage it's so much time, money, and effort to get the book written. Let's make sure people actually read it. So kudos to you for getting on that journey. All the rest of it sounds amazing as well. How can people find you and follow your work?
Thank you, Robbie. Yes, so my website is ellierich-poole.com, or I'm on LinkedIn, Ellie Rich-Poole. They're probably the 2 easy places. And from the website, you can get to loads of resources. You can get to my newsletter and much more. And of course, my email address is on there as well. So they'd be the best 2 starting points.
We're going to put all the links in the show notes at ontheschmooze.com. Ellie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Robbie. It's been an absolute pleasure.